The Innkeeper by Life Sketcher. Chapter 1371 An Evolution. It is not ideal, I'll admit, said Zuri modestly to the turtle. But it is the situation I have to live with. If I can become stronger, I may be able to break free of this predicament. Lex himself was extremely curious about Zuri's situation, but seeing how the clover did not talk about it, nor did the turtle ask about it, he did not broach the subject. Your level is too far from mine, the turtle said honestly. I cannot guide you on your cultivation path. I can only guide you in the path of your evolution. Even that will suffice, Zuri answered. Any change at all can help me change the requirements of my bottleneck, and bring a certain change in my situation. The turtle nodded, and for the first time as far as Lex was concerned, did something other than use its vines. A deep green aura surrounded the turtle as his eyes began to shine, and the turtle floated a few feet off the ground, his gaze fixed on the four-leaf clover. Lex got goosebumps, his body telling him that something remarkable was happening near him. Yet, as a mere mortal, all he could do was sit and watch the spectacle unfold. The turtle began to genuinely radiate a formidable aura, making Lex believe that the turtle could actually be an impressive fighter if it so chose. Yet while the turtle's aura reached Lex, it did not go much farther, as the mist absorbed even that, letting not a single ripple of that aura leak outwards. Lex could not help but wonder how such a situation came into being. If whoever was trapping Zuri here was stronger than her, then why didn't he just come down and find her? If she was the stronger one, why did she tolerate it? And if they were equal in power, why would Zuri accept such a suppressed state? This time, despite being exceptionally motivated, Zuri did not answer immediately. The whole reason she called the turtle here was so that she could become stronger. The turtle could not provide her a path to directly grow stronger, but it could provide her an opportunity to evolve. Technically speaking, even if her cultivation level would drop, an evolution meant that she had more strength and potential in general. Her ability to overcome bottlenecks would be greater, and the ceiling for her potential level was higher. But all of that potential came at the very real cost of genuine, tangible strength. Considering her precarious situation, it was not an easy decision. While she reflected on her choices, Lex realized something. The reason Zuri helped him was because she was bringing him some kind of good fortune, or helping him avoid bad fortune. Whichever it was, that was her way of cultivating. The concept that one could grow by helping others was a novel concept for him, at least in terms of cultivation. More importantly, he linked his attempts to leave behind legacies to this very same action. Could it be that he could remedy his situation by helping someone else? It was just one option. He would study his situation in great detail later on. For now, the focus was on Zuri. I'll do it, she finally said with conviction in her voice. Good. From fortune to fortune, the path I have seen for you is from a four-leaf clover, bringing fortune to others upon your demise, to good fortune and spiritual awakening for those near you. Your future is as a Bodhi tree. Chapter 1372 The Height of Ridiculousness. Bodhi tree? Lex had never heard of it. It was almost as if it didn't make an appearance in almost every cultivation novel he had ever read. That was because this was one of those rare trees, the knowledge and history of which had been lost to time, with only a scant few retaining their knowledge. Even Zuri, a formidable plant herself and one of the strongest beings in the origin realm, had never heard of it. Incidentally, there was a guest at the Midnight Inn who had also heard of, and in fact trained under a Bodhi tree. But such things were so ancient that no one would know of them, and not think to mention it to a random guest in the inn, especially when that guest was a Tao Lord. How can I evolve into the Bodhi tree? Asked Zuri. Although she was herself unfamiliar with this tree, she did not hesitate now that she had made a decision. It requires a few steps, but the most important is the transformation of the fortune power in your body to the power of golden purity. This will be difficult and intense, absorbing all your power of fortune and converting it into something else. That will be the primary cause of your loss in cultivation. The second thing you will need is a seed of enlightenment, the waters of Mount Buddha, and lastly, you will need to save the life of one with immense karmic virtue, or to grant someone enlightenment into the secrets of nirvana. Lex raised an eyebrow. Although he did not know what all these things were, they did not sound easy to. Done, said Zuri, interrupting Lex's thoughts. My clones have collected the necessary materials, and have simultaneously saved 13 billion beings with great karmic virtue, 300,000 beings of immense karmic virtue, and one being with visible karmic virtue. It was fortunate mortals were not affected by the aura of celestials. If he were anyone else, he would already be kneeling in the face of such awesome power. Isn't this a little too easy? Lex couldn't help but ask the turtle. Like her evolution took only a few minutes to arrange. It seems too simple. To be precise, the feeling Lex was getting was that he was witnessing someone who completed all the side quests before doing a single main quest in a video game. It is not quick at all, the turtle said, as he looked at the clone disappear into a mote of light, absorbed by the clover. Across the origin realm, many of Zuri's clones suddenly disappeared, though not all of them. This evolution is millions of years in the making. She has already done the hard part. Now all that's left is the easy part. Even then, easy is a relative term. Silly human, how can something so powerful be easy? Yeah, that's what I thought, Lex murmured, as he gazed at the clover. It was growing at a visible rate before his eyes, turning from a mere plant into a young tree. But more than anything, what impressed Lex was the mist. No matter how impressive or formidable the change happening down in the meadow, the mist did not let slip a single hint of it. Although the turtle had said the change would be instantaneous, it was more of an expression than something literal. The actual transformation still took over a day, during which time Lex fell into a trance, all without knowing it. The aura of the Bodhi tree, even unformed, put him in a state of enlightenment, and he began to digest all the numerous gains he had accumulated so far. It was not that his cultivation rose, it was that he began to fully comprehend the nuances behind all the laws, his immortal state, his eyes, his sword intent, his bloodline, his domination, his newly acquired lawcraft, and everything else. Within a few hours, he mastered all of them, or at least, as much of them as he could at his current level. Then, the thing he had been trying to avoid began happening. Lex's cultivation began to rise once more, until he reached the point where he could take the tribulation for the ninth and last level of the Earth Immortal Realm. Chapter 1373 Shady Turtle. Lex woke up from his trance feeling amazing, powerful, and as if he had another headache on his head. How was it so simple to go through the realms in the immortal realms? Wasn't it supposed to be harder, for various reasons? He, instead, was cruising through the realm despite his best efforts to slow down. Cultivating was really tough. He was trying to be responsible, but it was just too damn difficult. Of course, as far as anyone else was concerned, Lex was still immortal. He turned to look at Zuri, and discovered that her body was now much larger, for it was now a tree. But as far as trees were concerned, she was actually small. The canopy of the tree was barely 8 feet, 2.4 meters, high. The bark on the tree was light brown in color, while the leaves were deep green. The tree seemed just as unassuming as the clover had been, and all the surging aura it had been releasing before had vanished. Is it done? Lex asked. Yes, it is done. A transformation millions of years in the making has been completed. The clover has become a tree, and its luck and fortune can no longer be plucked so easily, answered the turtle. Indeed, it is done, Zuri said, her voice a whisper. But I need to rest for a while. Let us complete this transaction. I believe, in exchange for your help, you require a sequoia void seed? Yes. I'm also looking for an eternal autumn persimmon seed and a Genesis oak seed, so if you know where I could find them, I'd appreciate it. One of my clones will deliver all of them to the inn. This has been a pleasant cooperation. If, in the future, you require some cooperation, feel free to reach out to me. Do you mind if I spend a little more time on your planet? Lex asked. If he stayed long enough, he'd be able to link the planet Zuri to the inn. Do as you wish, though I would request you to leave this valley for your own safety. In fact, the rest of the planet won't be too safe either when I go to sleep. You know what? I'll explore next time, said Lex, and allowed himself to fade. Yes, he did not teleport to the inn. Instead, he faded, for what had visited the planet Zuri was not Lex, but a clone of his that required complete synchronization of his being. This way, if his clone was harmed in any way, he would not actually be hurt. However, now that he no longer needed it, he dismissed his clone, which caused it to fade from existence. This was not something Lex had done. Creating the clones and then establishing such a link between them that no one would be able to detect the difference was the turtle's idea and doing. But for this expense, Lex really needed to pull out all the stops. He went to Pell Jr. and grabbed a vial of blood essence, which was not easy to get at all, considering how tough the dragon's body was. In fact, Pell Jr. had to self-mutilate for Lex to get his hands on it. He also took the opportunity to grab a few dragon scales, and preserve a single second's worth of dragon's breath within a sealing scroll, an item which could seal anything inside of itself. Lex also grabbed some Jorlum Heart's blood. These were some of his most valuable treasures which he was willing to sell. He still had a couple amber chaos resin on hand, but he would not trade that away for anything. Those were Dao-level ingredients for heaven's sake. Then, he compiled a list and went back to the Emporium. Powell, upon looking at Lex, smiled awkwardly. How was the deal? Was it successful? Yes, it worked out quite well for everyone involved, Lex said, not revealing the details. That includes you, I might add. Although you refused a commission for setting up a meeting, you surely won't refuse an order that resulted from the meeting, will you? Lex held out the spirit crystal containing his list quite innocently, as if he was only requesting a few items. In truth, the list contained over 4 million items of various levels of rarity. Powell grabbed the crystal, and after a moment, grinned as widely as his face would allow. Lex, I could kiss you, he exclaimed in excitement, to which Lex responded by taking a step back. I'm sorry, I can do without that. Powell didn't mind, and instead rushed to the back, forgetting to tell Lex anything about how or when the order would be completed. He did not even return quickly. An entire 20 minutes later, Powell came running back in, holding what looked like a small jewelry box. The first batch of your items are in here, Powell explained. Fulfilling your order this time will not be as simple as the previous ones, and will require a number of weeks, during which there will be multiple shipments. Can I pay to expedite the process? Lex asked, unconcerned about the numerous issues such a request would raise. I think you can take a peek at the payment I'm offering before you decide. Lex held out a spatial ring which contained all that he was offering to pay, causing the poor shopkeeper to tremble with excitement. Please wait here while I see what I can manage, Powell yelled as he ran to the back once more. In truth, Lex had no estimate for the value of the items he was buying, or the price of the items he was selling. But since it got the job done, who was he to complain? Chapter 1374 I Want to Be. This time it did not take long for Powell to return, and this time he looked extremely excited, and also a little tense. Lex did not show it, but he suddenly raised his guard, as his instinct suddenly warned him that he was about to encounter a critical moment, one that would directly impact his entire life. Lex could not comprehend why buying a bunch of items could lead to something that could alter his entire life, but it did not take a genius to detect that it had something to do with why Powell looked so tense. Internally, he just sighed. He was just trying to focus on his end for goodness sake. Why did everything have to be so complicated? I have good news, Powell said, his voice filled with excitement though Lex could easily tell it was feigned. We have about 99.8% of all the materials you require on hand, and can easily acquire most of the remaining ones in a couple of days at most. There is only one item that is slightly complicated to procure, and I cannot give you an estimate of when I will be able to get my hands on it. But fret not. Considering your VIP status at the Emporium, I will personally go out and try to get it. You can check back in 2 days when the other items are ready to see if I have it. Also, we need to discuss your payment. Although it is highly valuable, considering the number of items you are buying, the amount is a little insufficient. This was actually the first time ever Lex haggled over prices like this at the Emporium. Essentially, the items Lex provided had no real price, and their value could only be estimated. With their worth not having a fixed value, mostly because they were priceless. Putting a price on them was difficult. The Emporium naturally wanted more, and though Lex could pay more, he wanted to increase the value of his possessions. A fierce bargaining session ended with Powell coming face to face with Lex's inner capitalist for the first time ever. Eventually, they reached an agreement, and Powell handed Lex a number of spatial bags which contained most of the items he requested. He went through the bags with his spirit sense, and in one of them encountered a lockbox with a few words engraved on it that read, "Do not open an Emporium." Lex showed no abnormal reaction upon citing that, and merely nodded, telling Powell he would see him in a couple of days before returning to the inn. Yet when he was at the inn, the feeling from his instincts heightened. It seemed that whatever was in the lockbox would result in a critical choice in his life that would alter his future. One way or another, he had to make a choice. But since he didn't sense any danger from the lockbox, Lex returned to his apartment and took it out. That meant that this was a critical, life-altering decision. "I just want to be Hokage, I just want to be a simple innkeeper. Why so many obstacles?" He now finally understood why Powell had seemed nervous. Clearly, he did not know whether or not Lex would follow through with the instructions in the box. But Lex decided to do it. Although he wanted to avoid any unnecessary troubles, that did not mean he was afraid of them. Over the next short while, Lex went over all the items he had bought, and planned out his construction of the second tavern. He couldn't really begin until he had all the materials, but he could prepare. He picked out a distant spot in the Midnight Realm, outside the Midnight Inn and far away from any intelligent races. He had a feeling that the expedited method to grow a void stabilization sequoia tree might leave this place drained of all energy for a while, almost like a dead zone. Lex suddenly paused, and had a thought. Was this the reason why Earth was a dead zone? Had someone refined an incredibly powerful treasure, or nurtured some incredible plants there at some point in history, leaving that place devoid of all energy? Once again, his instincts were silent, not providing him an answer. Normally, an immortal could intuit simple things just based on their advanced level, yet in this Lex found himself without an answer. Lex groaned as he added investigating the secret of dead zones on his list of things to do once he was no longer avoiding unnecessary trouble. Once the specified time was near, Lex teleported to the Origin Realm. Perhaps because he had been recently thinking about it, he could not help but teleport to Earth. Instantly, he was hit with a wave of nostalgia as he saw the blue planet, though it had changed a lot. In that instant, though, his instincts began telling him that Earth hid a few more secrets that no one had uncovered just yet. Lex put it on the back of his mind. How could he not know that a planet that imprisoned a demi-Dao lord for thousands of years surely hid some super secrets? But now was not the time to dwell on these things. He pulled out the talisman, and used it. Lex felt himself being teleported away, and did not resist. It was time to find out what all the fuss was about. Chapter 1375 Really Bad. Upon teleporting successfully, Lex found himself standing in a swamp, with dark clouds hovering overhead. Thunder rumbled in the distance, filling the darkness with a sense of foreboding. The spiritual energy in this place, wherever it was, had a concentration similar to a 3-star planet, so it wasn't really exceptional, nor was it mundane. Lex spread his spirit sense out, and discovered that there was nothing of significant interest anywhere around him, with the strongest being in the vicinity being an alligator-like beast, sleeping in the waters at the nascent realm. As far as appearances were concerned, there was nothing particularly special about this place. But, considering that Lex was being particularly attentive and thorough in his investigation, he discovered something. There was a particular region within the range of his spirit sense that seemed completely normal. It was an unassuming portion of the swamp, where the waters flowed and the winds blew, some small animals traveling in and out and a few insect hives making that place their home. It was totally unremarkable, save for one simple fact. Within this region grew a black flower that Lex recognized. It was the dipped lotus, a very rare plant that is difficult to grow artificially. The flower contains a heavy amount of energy, one of the many kinds of energy that exists in the universe. It wasn't the energy in itself that made it special, but the fact that the energy was uncontaminated with any residual evil or malevolence. After all, energy usually accumulated in places where a lot of death had occurred, as it was a byproduct of dissipating souls. Lex also discovered that countless other connections he had with the universe at large, connections he did not understand or was even aware of, had been cut off. He had never noticed them before, for they had existed as long as he had. Only now, in their absence, did he realize they had existed to begin with. One of them, he realized, was a connection to the destiny of the human race. Whether he was aware of it or not, whether he wanted it or not, he was inevitably linked to the human race. That link was not just in the feedback he got from the cosmic ascendance spectrum, but what he contributed to it as well, not to mention something much deeper that he could not yet understand. Yet that was just one of the many, invisible influences that had suddenly been lifted off his shoulders by entering this room. Yet not all was so pleasant. Among the many connections he lost, it also included his connection to Jack. Although Lex and Jack were one and the same, always aware of each other's existence and experiences, from the moment Lex entered this room, he could no longer sense his connection to Jack. Considering they were a part of each other, instead of separate beings, this disconnection was extremely concerning. Yet even that was not at the forefront of Lex's concerns. The most alarming and significant connection he had lost was not to Jack, but to the Midnight Realm. Although the system was still within him, the connection between the system and the Midnight Realm had been severed. It was to the point where he could not even automatically return to the realm if he wished. Mary suddenly appeared in front of him, her expression extremely grave. "I suppose I don't need to tell you this, but this is really bad." Chapter 1376 Monkey Business. It was another average day at the Midnight Inn. The sun was shining, the birds were singing, literally there was a concert going on down at the village organized by some birds, and life was good. Golf carts could be seen driving over lush green lawns, and peacocks could be seen running through the fields, carrying passengers. In the water, magic carpets acted as mounts, while in the air butterflies acted as a taxi service. It was not heaven, but it was a paradise, at least by mortal standards. Wukong was cultivating his mind by playing a game called Go Fish, a devious and ingenious method used by mortals which employed strategy and misdirection, while honing one's reflexes and keeping the mind nimble. In front of him sat a little girl, her age not even that of a century, though for some reason she kept thinking herself old. Beside her sat her husband, a mischievous little fellow going through his rebellious phase. These children were called Brandon and Audrey Morrison, but despite their young age, their penchant for mischief really intrigued Wukong, which is why he was spending time with them. For example, at the moment it seemed like they were playing cards, but in truth they were listening in on some gossip nearby which involved a scandal among the fiery mammoths wherein, apparently, a young fiery mammoth had all its fur shaved off in the middle of a battlefield, leaving it even more naked than the day it was born. This act was actually a result of Brandon's instigation, and listening to it caused the little boy to giggle without constraint. "What is it?" Lex asked gravely, ready to hear some secrets about the system. What he did not expect was that Mary wanted to discuss something else entirely. "The guest in your inn, the one whose name you erased from your memory. He is not a normal entity, and you cannot treat him as a normal Tao Lord. He is powerful beyond your imagination, and destructive beyond what you can conceive. He is the epitome of mischievousness, and the true origin behind the expression monkey business. Do not think you can keep any secrets from him, you can't. The only thing you can do to protect yourself is pay as little attention to him as possible, and avoid him at all costs. Let him stay in the inn if he wishes, and don't even think about it. The less you concern yourself with him, the safer you will be." "It seems like you know him quite intimately," Lex said, hinting at something. "Of course I know him. Even when I was born, he was a legend beyond all legends. Let me tell you something so you can understand what level of being you are dealing with. The cosmic ascendance spectrum is not a real list, and does not physically exist in the universe. Or at least, it was not real, and did not exist physically. It was simply a hierarchy orchestrated by the deeper laws of the universe that everyone referred to. Yet legend has it that, dissatisfied with his position on it, he journeyed to the unknown depths of the universe, using the very fabric of reality, the same one that forms the Sony vortex, manifested the spectrum, just so he could physically carve out his name at the top. Of course, no one knows if such a thing is true, and he certainly isn't at the top of the list, but for such a rumor to exist, especially among Tao lords, you can imagine the kind of power he wields. But, for someone as weak as you, there is a very easy way to deal with him. As long as you ignore his existence entirely, even going as far to forgetting he exists, he will most likely leave you alone. Even the Midnight Inn, and the Innkeeper, are not enough to attract his attention. Not truly. Chapter 1377 Good Reason. To be entirely honest, specifically going and telling me all of this is doing more to make me pay attention to him than forget him, Lex said. Why did you feel the need to tell me this over here? You don't understand. Over here, if you learn about him, and then seal the knowledge, then you will not attract his attention. Simultaneously, you can leave yourself certain hints, affecting how you behave. This way, even with your memories sealed, you'll avoid specifically thinking about him from time to time. Even if you don't realize it, you've done the same with your time affinity. And think back to when you first met him. Anytime you thought about him, he seemed to know, and even corrected your form of address. Can you really tell me you haven't thought about him since then? Even if you think about him randomly, despite not knowing his name, you will attract his attention. It's better to condition yourself to not to think about him at all, under any circumstance. As long as you do that, you will be fine. That is truly the only way to be safe. Lex had to admit that, from time to time, he had thought back to that mysterious Tao Lord, simply because there was a Tao Lord within the inn. It was hard not to think about it, since it represented a huge issue. But if ignoring him really was the solution. Did you say I did the same thing with my memories related to my time affinity? What hints did I leave myself? Mary just gave Lex a look, causing him to shrug. Is there anything else you want to tell me in this place? He asked. Yes, on the surface, that is supposed to appear like the highest status we can afford a customer. But in fact, there is another level above it, the best customer. Or perhaps it's better to say the level is allotted to the one who has spent the most at the Emporium within a century. You yourself are not close to the top just yet, but with your latest acquisition, you have entered the top 100 list of best customers at the Emporium. If you continue to shop at the Emporium at the same scale as you have been recently, then you will soon reach the status of the best customer. I suppose I don't need to tell you that getting such a status comes with its own perks. I can imagine, though I don't understand why you would hide something like that. Shouldn't you advertise such a position so that more people compete for such a position? I can only imagine it would be good for business. I'm also not seeing why something like this could not be talked about back at the Emporium. Powell shook his head. This matter involves the interest of many. More importantly, it is the request of the current best customer that we keep it hidden, and so we have. I am restrained by many rules, so it is easier for me to say certain things than it is others. I cannot tell you what exactly the benefits of becoming the best customer are, but I can tell you that they are not so easily found elsewhere, for which reason the existing top customer has killed a lot of people. Lex narrowed his eyes, getting what Powell was hinting at. The top customer has many privileges even besides the main reward. And one of those is to get a list of the top 100 customers of the Emporium whenever there is a change. Suffice to say, the top customer has more than once killed anyone who was deemed a financial threat to their supremacy over the list. Of course, those strong enough to resist the top customer have also survived, but in general even they experience a certain level of intimidation to reduce their spending at the Emporium. What was once supposed to be an incentive for others to shop more has long since become one of the leading reasons for why the Emporium loses its customers. Lex groaned, for he was genuinely not interested in the position of best customer. But why did he have to go and say that guy liked to maintain his supremacy? Now he'd have to go and end that reign. Chapter 1378 Just a little bit. So you're telling me that now some overpowered maniac is going to be out to hunt me down? Can you tell me who it is? Lex asked, concerned but not too concerned. He was used to being hunted down by overpowered enemies. He was already thinking of how to respond. Unfortunately, I am restricted from sharing any information about our top customer, although I can tell you that the Emporium is not happy with how he has been behaving. But there is nothing we can do about it. Unless that customer breaks some Emporium rule, we cannot retaliate against him. I merely wanted to share this information with you, to warn you in case you wanted to hold back on your shopping. This goes against company policy, which is why I had to do so in secret. Well, I am not so easily intimidated, Lex said, but I also can't just act blindly without knowing who I'm up against. Is there anything you can tell me about this person? Or is there any way I can figure out who it is? Powell shook his head. I cannot share any information about said customer's identity whatsoever. I can only recommend that you look into some protective equipment which can allow you to divine the identity of anyone looking to harm you. Unfortunately, such equipment is in short demand since countless powerful and influential diviners seem to have vanished from the Origin realm some years ago. Lex frowned as he tried to think of a solution. It shouldn't be too difficult, after all, Lex was a connected man now. Within the Origin realm, he had friends in high places. But no doubt, whoever had been taking advantage of the Emporium was also no doubt not a nobody. There's also something else interesting I can tell you in case you ever do become a top customer, Powell said, with a smile. Within the Emporium, each Powell is ranked based on our performances. If you become the best customer, then I will automatically become the main Powell, in charge of all other Powells as well as the Emporium itself. Dao Lords do not shop at the Emporium, Powell said gravely. The Emporium has a strict policy to give anything a Dao Lord requires to them for free. We have never accepted payment from a single Dao Lord, despite serving one in the past once. There you go, so nothing I can't handle. As long as I can just learn who the enemy is, it should not be an issue. Anyway, Powell, this has been great and I really appreciate you giving me a heads up, but I've already been in this vortex for a dozen seconds, and I can't really afford to stay disconnected from the universe for long. If there's nothing else, I'd like to take my leave. Ah, there is one thing, Powell said quickly, realizing Lex's urgency. Do you still have the box I gave you with you? If so, can you return it to me with a key from the midnight and inside? Lex raised an eyebrow, but didn't question it. He summoned the box, put a golden key inside, and gave it to Powell. It wasn't as if the keys of the inn were exactly rare anymore. Excellent, the shopkeeper said with a soft smile. You can leave the vortex by walking through the wall. I cannot leave just yet, so you go on ahead. Having a confirmation from Powell, Lex suddenly walked right into the wall, finally leaving the vortex, and regaining his connection to the universe. All the things he was disconnected from finally came back, and Lex felt like he emerged from underwater, finally able to breathe again. Being disconnected from the destiny of the human race was disconcerting on a level he had not anticipated. But his smile did not last long. The moment he returned, he reconnected to Jack as well, and their memories resynchronized. The thing was, unaware of what happened to Lex, Jack might have overreacted just a little bit. Chapter 1379 Folklore Realm. Jack, calm down, Tiny Sparkles yelled in disbelief. Who would have thought that there would be such a day that Tiny Sparkles would be telling others to calm down? The problem with Tiny Sparkles yelling at his fairy friend to calm down was that as a unicorn with dwarfism, he had somehow mutated into being more powerful than almost any other unicorn he had ever come across. That immense power permeated into every essence of his being, which meant that when Tiny Sparkles, the unicorn a mere few inches large, spoke, his voice was so deep it reverberated across the land, often causing earthquakes. Fortunately, Jack had used enchantments on Tiny Sparkles, weakening him, allowing the unicorn to control himself. Unfortunately, due to their current unusual predicament, that enchantment had worn off. So when the unicorn yelled, trying his best to calm down their captain, his voice shattered the ground beneath their feet, revealing a vast open sky underneath them. After all, they were on an island, formed of the usual stuff such as dirt, rock and whatever else islands were made of. Oh, it was also floating up on a cloud, far above the planet underneath. Well, the island really couldn't really be said to be floating anymore due to the inadvertent actions of a particular baby, crystal alligator whose very touch turned anything and everything to crystal. Only recently had Jack taught him to stop crystallizing the air itself, but upon seeing the vast sea of clouds upon which the island floated, the alligator jumped in, turning the clouds to crystal, causing them to become too heavy to float, and therefore fall along with the island. Although Tiny Sparkles himself hadn't seen the event, by all accounts, that had happened before Jack went on a raging rampage against the giant who had used his powers and enlarged the Jolly Rancher to the size of what Jack called the Statue of Liberty. Now, Tiny Sparkles had not really traveled much, and had not seen any such statue, but it was clear to him that the Jolly Rancher was much too big for their tiny, literally tiny pirate crew to use. "Oh Lord," wailed Bob, the leather jacket-wearing drama cat that Jack had rescued and befriended some time ago, as he rode a heavy bike much too large for him across the massive deck of the Jolly Rancher. "Oh Lord, have mercy on this world that has provoked the captain's ire. The captain's heart is boundless, like the open horizon, and his love endless, like the itchiness of a mosquito bite. But more so than anything, his anger is righteous. It is a benevolence I regret I cannot face, and so to those who face it, grant mercy. You are too good to me, Lord, too good." From his horn, Tiny Sparkles shot out a rainbow-colored beam that swiftly morphed into a chocolate spread-covered piece of toast that was stuffed into Bob's mouth. Jack did not understand too much about it yet, but one thing led to another, and Jack had been trying to cook some kidney beans when they suddenly sprouted into a massive beanstalk that pushed them into the air to an island, where they were confronted by a giant bear. So far, things were still reasonable. Using a bit of his fairy magic, and the charm of a crew of tiny, cute pirates, Jack was negotiating with the bear. Then the bear felt a severe case of FOMO, fear of missing out, and wanted to join them in their ship. Instead of being reasonable and shrinking down to size himself, he used his gigantism powers to enlarge the pirate ship. As it happened, that was also the instant Lex disappeared. Well, Jack overreacted a little bit, only because now the helm of his ship was too large for him to use, and the ship was resisting all attempts into shrinking back down. Some words were exchanged, someone may have shaved a bit of a certain bear's hair, an alligator jumped into the clouds upon waking up from its nap, an owl may have snuck into the treasure vault of aforementioned, now bald bear and stolen some things. Words were exchanged, fists were thrown, and now the sky was falling down on the world down below. "Fee-fi-fo this, Baldy," Jack screamed, crossing some boundaries Tiny Sparkles personally would not have crossed. Even though the ship was now much larger than Jack, Jack was still linked to it and could control it. As such, he used his wings to get a little distance from the bear, and then slammed the ship into the bear, speeding up the ship's descent as it crashed towards the ground, turning into a ball of fire. "I wish upon the shooting star," Bob began screaming as he saw the flaming ship, yet a peanut butter and jelly sandwich was slammed into his mouth before he could continue. The crystal alligator cried, looking back up at the clouds and the sky. Cannons continued to fire. Ollie hid the treasures, and Tiny Sparkles tried to call out to the captain once more, but this time the weight of his voice caused a chaos tribulation, a phenomenon that only existed in mature realms. The pandemonium came to an abrupt halt when the ship, ramming into the bear's face, finally reached the ground, causing an explosion that may as well have been nuclear. The severity of the explosion forced everyone to pause their actions and defend themselves, finally allowing for some peace once the actual explosion subsided. "Tiny Sparkles, you really need to stop distracting me while I fight," Jack complained as he flew over, feeling great after venting all of his frustrations on the bear. "Now, what were you trying to say?" Jack also re-established the weakening enchantment on the unicorn, so that his voice was no longer a lethal weapon. "Not much," he responded. "I just wanted to let you know that only the bear can shrink the ship since it used a bloodline ability we're all too weak to counter right now. Without the bear, we'll need to reach the celestial realm to shrink the ship." Jack's smile suddenly faded, and looked towards the bear that no longer had a face, or a neck, or an upper torso. It probably wouldn't be doing anything anytime soon, or ever again. Chapter 1380 Stowaways. Jack coughed into his hand as he tried to hide his embarrassment, but there was nothing he could do about it now. The giant bear was deader than dead. Looking at it objectively, all of this was the bear's fault to begin with. Why hadn't it just shrunk down instead of growing the Jolly Rancher? Now, not only did it not get to ride the shop, but Jack and the rest were inconvenienced as well. Everybody, form up. I want to see you all in a line. Form up. I have an important speech to deliver, Jack roared, his loudest yell quieter than Tiny Sparkle's lowest whisper. But it didn't matter. His pirate crew suddenly lined up in front of him, though why did there seem to be a few extra members? There was, of course, first mate Tiny Sparkles, and Ollie. The baby crystal alligator was there, as well as Bob. But why was there a gnome lining up as well? And why was the gnome's beard 8 feet, 2.4 meters, long while the gnome himself was shorter than 2 feet, 0.6 meters? As if that wasn't enough, right beside the gnome was a small bear cub, dressed in the robes of a monk, even going as far as wearing monk beads around its neck. Was this cub related in any way to the massive bear Jack had just killed? Logic dictated that as the most likely answer, but the cup bore no ill will towards Jack. The fairy could sense as much. But even more than the bear cup, the sudden new addition that attracted Jack's attention the most was the final one. A regular-sized hamster, that stood on its one hind leg as well as wooden prosthetic, and was dressed like a buccaneer, looked Jack right in the eyes as if there was nothing suspicious about his presence there whatsoever. You guys, we're not really hiring. What are you doing here? Jack asked, pausing from the rousing speech he was about to give. Someone crashed the island where we were imprisoned. Our home fell from the sky, the gnome said abruptly. We wish to see the universe, the monk bear said. My teacher told me monks eat lots of meat and meet lots of women. As such, I have decided to stain myself with the red sands of the mortal world, and witness such things for myself. Safe passage would be appreciated. I can pay in honey. Jack looked at the two, and then finally looked at the hamster who looked like a hardened criminal who had lived a long life. Kill me or take me, I'm not leaving this ship, the hamster said, and then spit at the ground. But instead of spit, it accidentally spat out one of the nuts it had been hoarding in his cheek. But he was too embarrassed to go pick it back up, so instead he just looked away, his bulging cheeks hanging on either side of his face. That sand is red from blood, said the gnome. Don't be ridiculous. Blood would start darkening after so long, said the hamster. Don't you be ridiculous. How can cultivator's blood darken? That is the blood of mortals that does that. Who said cultivator's blood can't darken? If mortal blood can be oxidized by mortal air, then the immortal air of this realm can oxidize the immortal blood of this realm. It's hard to argue with that logic, murmured Tiny Sparkles. Oh Lord Bob began, but this time Jack stuffed a jawbreaker into his mouth. Whatever it is that's causing the sand to turn red, it's clearly coming from there, Jack said, pointing to a massive, gaping hole in the sand far away. As responsible pirates as responsible good guys, it's our job to restore this natural ecosystem and set things straight. Full speed ahead. While the whole crew discussed the red sand, down below the deck, in a room, Ollie was glaring at the baby alligator. Don't you dare, the Shadow Talon threatened, hiding a treasure chest behind himself. The room was littered with countless crystallized treasures already, each of them emanating a powerful spiritual energy, enough to entice even immortals. But neither the Shadow Talon nor the alligator cared about those. They, instead, were focused entirely on the last treasure chest. The alligator snapped its jaw, as if complaining that it needed a chew toy. It was, after all, teething, and wanted something to scratch its gums with. I'll scratch your gums with a dagger if you come close, Ollie threatened. The two continued to argue, unaware as the lid of the treasure chest behind them slowly opened, and a golden goose peeked out, to see what the situation was like. Upon seeing that the other two were distracted, the goose carefully lifted the lid of the chest, and stepped out. The entire process was soundless, but the moment the goose touched the wooden floor, the wood started to turn into gold. Up above, Jack, who was connected to the ship, immediately noticed something awry. Chapter 1381 Planting Prep. Lex returned to the inn, and fortunately, not everything had burned down to the ground. It seemed the realm could tolerate being disconnected from him temporarily, but it was definitely not something he should attempt regularly. While he himself could not determine the extent of his damage, the notification he received as soon as he left the Sani vortex was a clear indicator of just how much damage his absence could do. New notification: Midnight Realm has suffered from a destabilization of laws. Address the issue lest the realm growth is affected. The odd thing was that it was only a notification, not a quest. Maybe the damage wasn't significant enough for a quest. The good news was that after consulting with Ripley, Lex already had an idea about training a certain batch of workers to help maintain his realm. He hadn't expected much, but when he sent his workers to the Temple of Fasting to see if there were lessons on realm nurturing, to his immense surprise, there were. It seemed like such lessons were only available to immortals, which explains why Lex didn't know about them before. They were also aimed towards larger powers who controlled various realms, and technically speaking the Midnight Inn fit into that category perfectly. But they had not yet learned enough to contribute to the realm's repair. Unsure of exactly what to do to repair the laws of the realm, he decided to delegate the task to the planning division and have them give him suggestions. To be clear, Lex could find solutions himself as well, either by listening to his instincts or by asking others, but considering that the task wasn't urgent, he decided to use this opportunity to train his workers. There were still countless things going on in the inn to occupy his attention, so the days passed by quickly until it was time to return to the Emporium and get the remainder of the materials from Powell. Powell acted completely normally, handing over the remaining ingredients. They had a short conversation, but nothing out of the ordinary. Lex had assigned Roland the task of looking into associates, close friends, or business partners of the owner of the Emporium, but there was no lead currently. Even so, Roland was quite confident in his job. Many years ago, he had formed a secret organization with all the kids who used to visit the inn, turning them into agents for him, trading information. Instead of an intelligence agency, his organization was more like one that gave everyone the opportunity to discover what they wished, as long as they had contributed enough. While that organization was not yet mature, it gave him many leads that he wanted or needed. For something like this, though, he would not be able to rely on them. Instead, he was working with this new AI friend that he made, apparently. Lex didn't ask questions. Once the formation was complete, Lex needed to alter the feng shui of the environment. To be entirely honest, Lex read the instructions about what feng shui was and how to alter it countless times, but didn't understand what it was about at all. Even though Lex was lauded for his amazing perception and comprehension, certain things eluded even him. Fortunately, the instructions for how to alter the feng shui were precise, and he didn't need to rely on himself to do it. This part was actually interesting. He had never done landscaping before. Who knew that taking out one's sword and literally carving the earth within a region could be so much fun? It was like creating a wood carving, but out of the ground in a region large enough to cover a city from back on Earth. He carved away any nearby hills or mountains, making the area look like a flat plain, and transplanted numerous trees within the region, turning it into a forest. Lex even went as far as bringing the appropriate kind of wildlife that would inhabit such a forest, taking care to establish a well-balanced, self-sufficient ecosystem. But that only concluded the preliminary steps for the forest's growth. Next, he needed to alter the weather as well. Controlling the weather, for a short period, was still easy. One just needed to flex their cultivation a bit. But what Lex needed to do was create a very specific, natural weather pattern, that is not something he could do with a single technique. Instead, he had to alter the entire geography of the region, forming natural patterns that eventually result in the desired result. The next steps were a bit tedious, but he used the various ingredients he'd bought to create massive lakes, construct mountains of metal, carve out rivers, establish floodplains, and much more. As he continued, Lex was able to sense that the nature energy within this region was growing more dense, beginning to form naturally. It took him a lot of work before the area was finally ready, and Lex could finally plant the seed. He approached the very center of the formation and looked at the still soft soil, and pulled out the seed. Now, the size of the seed was large, but not too abnormal. It was about 5 feet, 1.5 meters, tall, or about 10 hot dogs tall, or approximately 1.6 washing machines tall. If one wants to be extremely accurate, they could also say it was the size of 26 M16 rifle bullets. It was the weight of the seed that was surprising. At about 110,000 pounds, it weighed as much as 1 million hot dogs, 551 washing machines, or 4.17 million M16 rifle bullets. That was a lot, which was why when Lex placed it in the soil, the seed began to sink on its own. Chapter 1382 Trees of the Heavens. As the seed sank into the soil, Lex cracked his neck and concentrated his focus. There was no room for error now. Fortunately, his instincts somehow synchronized with the information he had read about growing the tree, and began guiding him perfectly. He channeled his spiritual energy into countless little strings and trickled them into the soil, slowly snaking them through the dirt to the sinking seed. A barrier, formerly invisible, suddenly appeared covering the skin of the seed, filled with various unusual characters. The barrier was the void shell of the seed, a protective shield to save the seed from the cosmic radiation of space. It would only break under very specific circumstances, so that the seed would have the optimal conditions for its growth when it eventually breaks. Lex was not breaking the barrier, but diffusing the unique energy that it was made of into the seed itself. One of the reasons Lex chose the void sequoia tree for his next tavern was because of how naturally sturdy it was. It could tolerate almost any natural environment once grown, and grow in almost any condition. It was only in its early phase where it was sensitive and vulnerable. The turtle had provided him with a way to grow the tree, and have it mutate into the void stabilization sequoia tree, and though he didn't know much about the difference between the two, he was certain that it wouldn't be weaker. As such, one of the conditions for its natural growth was to spend a few centuries in the void. That was the one environment Lex could not recreate, but there were ways to emulate its effects, such as using the natural void energy in the protective barrier. Lex channeled his energy into his right eye, and countless tiny arrays started forming above the soil, sometimes watering it, other times striking the soil with lightning, and other times just gently blowing on it. For a time, it seemed like Lex was just pumping his energy into the soil without any effect, but as soon as the barrier on the seed began to actually dissolve, a tempest began to blow within the region. Spiritual energy from all around began to flow into the soil, as if there were a hurricane above it, rapidly pulling in all the surrounding energy. Lex also began releasing some of the ingredients he had gathered, allowing them to be pulled along with the energy. Yet the energy storm was just the beginning. With the blowing winds came clouds, gathering directly over Lex, and they kept gathering until the entire region was shrouded in darkness. Then came the flash of lightning, followed by a raging thunderstorm. The winds buffeted Lex as if they were hated rivals, and the rain pelted him like it was artillery. The strength of each drop was so immense, it could kill a normal mortal man. That was because this was not water that was raining, but spiritual energy essence. The land, covered in darkness due to the clouds, suddenly gained a few tiny dots of light, as if far in the distance, as if stars millions of light years away. This was a result of an illusion brought about by the changes Lex was bringing about by manipulating laws. Completely focused on his task, Lex did not realize that the laws of the Midnight Realm themselves began to stir. They had become corrupted, to a degree, due to the momentary absence of the Midnighten system, which acted as the very core of the realm. But in this moment, as the void stabilization sequoia tree began to grow, and as its roots began to dig into the soil, they touched more than just the ground. Instead, they grew down into the foundational laws of the very realm. Since the laws of the Midnight Realm already were very supportive of trees, the void stabilization sequoia tree encountered no resistance when it touched them. Instead, the laws began to nourish the tree itself, while the tree, true to its name, began to provide a stabilizing effect to the laws of the realm. The growth of a realm was not quick, and was influenced not only by time, but by the events that took place in the realm itself. The greater and grander the event, the more the realm would gain a capacity for supporting greater and stronger existences. At the same time, the realm's laws would also become more varied. Being less or more varied was neither a good or bad thing. Each situation was unique to its own realm. Under the influence of the tree, the realm's laws began to stabilize long before they were meant to. They were supposed to be malleable, to account for the changes that would happen to the realm when the cosmic sea is used up. But as the laws began to stabilize, that malleability began to vanish. But the issue at hand now was that there was no way to form the cosmic sea anymore, for it was formed naturally by the energies produced during the birth of the realm. Yet while this new issue presented itself, the older issues began to vanish. The destability in the realm laws began to vanish under the stabilizing influence of the tree, and the realm began to strengthen itself. Focused completely on the task at hand, Lex did not notice the changes, nor did he read the system notifications. But the turtle, the mischievous turtle, who was looking at the Bodhi tree sapling it had secretly acquired, felt the changes to the realm and grinned. The turtle had decided. It would make the greatest heaven of them all, combining all the holy trees. It had on its hands the saplings for the Bodhi and heavenly tree, but many more still remained out of its reach. But soon it would also acquire the Eden tree sapling, as well as the Yggdrasil sapling. Then, it would need to find a way to get its hands on saplings for the world tree, tree of life, the Irminsul, the cedars of the deities, the peach tree of immortality, and the jambu tree. Once it got its hands on all 10 of these saplings, it would begin to develop the ultimate heaven, and in the ultimate heaven, the turtle would grow a Gaia sapling, a sapling for the very first tree in existence, the originator of the Tao of wood, and one of the most powerful beings in existence. Then, it would have a good garden. The turtle chuckled to himself. Chapter 1383 Swirly Christmas Tree. The tree was growing, the spiritual energy was raging, legends were being written, and within his heart Lex lamented that he was once again doing something heaven-defying, setting an incredibly high bar for others his age. If his life were a cultivation novel instead, real life, then his skill level would be so high, others his age would never even get an opportunity to try and slap his face. It would be a boring novel. That is why real life was more interesting, because it hardly mattered who was his age and who wasn't. When one faced an enemy, the talent level, cultivation time, genius level, and any number of such things did not matter. What truly mattered was how much money Lex could make from it, and from this tavern he would make a killing, so he put his utmost effort into it, tapping into the noble and sacred Tao of capitalism. On a serious note, Lex had to concentrate not because of capitalism or anything else. It was because the tree was growing rapidly, being nurtured by the most exquisite quality energies available. Such nourishment meant that there was a high chance that the tree might gain spiritual awakening, which was not ideal. To be clear, just because something was of a high level, or had an immense amount of power or strength did not mean that they would undergo spiritual awakening and become sentient. If that were the case, every rock and tree in 5-star worlds would be a living entity. Instead, such things would need to be nourished by spiritual energy of a higher quality depending on their own inherent strength. For example, a random apple tree from Earth could easily gain spiritual awakening in the Midnight Realm, because its own inherent level was low. But such an environment would not be enough to awaken a void sequoia tree. But the specific nourishing Lex was providing the seed with, not to mention the fact that he was stimulating a mutation, meant that there was a pretty decent chance that the tree might encounter a spiritual awakening. Strictly speaking, the system did not set any conditions preventing such a thing, and a sentient tree would still serve as a treehouse. But Lex had learned his lesson from having a spaceship with a fear of heights. Becoming sentient was good and all, but what if the tree woke up with a personality that was a neat freak? How would he deal with customers walking all over it? Or what if the tree had a personality that wanted to transform into a human shape, much like Zuri walked around looking like a human? That would not be conducive to acting as a treehouse at all. At such a time, Lex would have to take measures to address the situation. But something like that, in his mind, would be Plan B. Plan A was to prevent such a situation to begin with. As they say, my tree, my choice. Unfortunately, preventing a spiritual awakening was not a part of the manual the turtle provided, so Lex had to rely on the few methods he already knew. Unfortunately, most methods could not be used since they required slightly injuring the spirit, and he did not want to compromise the quality and strength of the tree. Even without having a spiritual awakening, most living things had a spirit, even trees. It was just that they weren't to the point of being sentient. The way Lex used to prevent the tree from gaining sentience was to oppress the spirit. Of course, since he was just beginning to use his bonsai technique now, the tree would still end up growing a few 100 feet more. At the same time, the requirements of the tree, in terms of nutrients and energy, began to subtly surpass what Lex was providing from the various ingredients he was providing. This was on purpose, for he didn't want to grow the tree to the end of its potential, and instead wanted to grow it sufficiently and with a steady foundation. Over the course of countless years, the tree would surely get many opportunities to grow even stronger. This clear malnutrition would not actually weaken the tree, but slowly halt its accelerated growth. Of course, it would also leave the region where the tree had grown barren of nutrients and spiritual energy. But, with time, that problem would fix itself, much like the dead zone around Earth suddenly vanished one day. Lex was momentarily distracted by thoughts of the dead zone once more, as if his subconscious was directing his attention towards it. Lex noticed this, but the list of things he had to do were too numerous. Adventuring would have to wait. Under Lex's careful guidance, while the main branch of the void stabilization sequoia tree remained straight, its many branches grew outwards in a spiral all around the tree, forming a peculiar yet beautiful sight. It was as if Lex was looking at a Christmas tree, yet instead of the branches coming straight out, they swirled around the tree from the bottom to the top. That was merely the appearance from the outside. Hidden behind the thick outer layer of leaves was a complex maze of trunks, as if numerous streets going across a vertical city. The foundation for the treehouse was complete, and the tree was finally grown. Now, Lex had to actually build the treehouse on top of it. Best of all, the tree hadn't gained any sentience, so he could rest easy. Now, to construct the actual treehouse itself, Lex was not using wood. Instead, he would refine the entire treehouse out of metal, using bits of vivital within, the same metal as his sword. The house portion of the treehouse was going to be a treasure he refined himself. While Lex couldn't claim to be the best treasure manufacturer around, otherwise he wouldn't have had Oren craft Naraka for him, he was still pretty good. Lex teleported away, and with his departure the pressure on the tree finally faded. The tree spirit, having been refined under the pressure of domination, nourished by the purest forms of energy Lex could provide, and fertilized in dragon blood, began to bubble, as if it was about to undergo a metamorphosis, shedding its mundane form for a far greater one. Above the tree, a tribulation cloud began to gather. This was not the tribulation cloud of someone entering the immortal realm, but the cloud that provided tempering to a universal-grade treasure that was about to be born. Chapter 1384 Treehouse of His Dreams. Lex returned to a place he had not been to in a short while, the home of the dwarfs in the Midnight Realm. The last time he was here, he had forged Naraka, his sword. It was genuinely a tragedy that Lex was not a wholehearted sword cultivator, because his sword was amazing. Its potential was just as endless as himself, and the stronger sword intent it was bathed in, the faster it would grow even stronger. As it was, Lex's truly varied array of skills and abilities overshadowed the actual power of his sword. To say that the sword had just as much potential as Lex was a testament to how genuinely absurdly strong it was, considering all that Lex had been through. In all his time in the cultivation world, Lex had only ever faced a single person who could rival him in the same realm as him, Cornelius. Besides that one enigmatic king, whose schemes ran deep, whether it was dragons, devil, angels, or beings of some other race, none had been able to stand toe-to-toe with Lex. The fact that Orenai of the Vivital Mines, the first dwarf of the realm, had the skills to forge such a treasure spoke not only of the immense amount of skill and talent he had, but knowledge as well. Considering that Oren did not have the legacy of the other realms to improve his own treasure manufacturing capabilities, everything he knew was self-taught. In the time that Lex had locked the inn away, he had studied treasure manufacturing from the dwarf as well, in exchange for giving him an immense amount of knowledge later on. True to his word, once the Midnight Realm had been opened again, he had bought countless books, tomes, inheritances, video tutorials, and podcasts for the dwarf to go through to expand his knowledge. Even when Lex returned, the dwarf was still studying, immersed in all things related to forging. "Old dwarf, I'm borrowing your forge," Lex said, completely aware that Orin probably hadn't hurt him. It didn't matter, he was well known here anyway. Deep in the heart of the mountain, above a flowing river of lava, sat a forge made out of 300 tons of Vivital, an utter and sheer waste in Lex's opinion. Once forged, Vivital could not be reforged, so till the end of time, this Vivital would only exist in the form of this forge. Maybe Dao Lords could do something about stuff like this, for much like sovereigns they could reshape reality to their whims, but that was not for Lex to know. Even if they could, why would Dao Lords care about Vivital? Though the metal was precious and rare for immortals, it was nowhere near as valuable as a Dao-level ingredient. But as ridiculous as it was, Lex had to admit that the forge technically was awesome, and was an immense aid in treasure manufacturing. Within the origin realm on an frozen planet, seemingly devoid of all life, a wolf suddenly appeared. His appearance was oddly similar to that of Fenrir, almost as if they were from a similar breed, but it seemed to lack a certain, almost imperceptible charm. He also gave off an incredibly powerful aura. The wolf sniffed the air, and then teleported away, appearing in an underground, abandoned bunker. Or, well, abandoned was not the right word for it, since the bunker still contained the corpses of all who had worked within the bunker. After the debacle with Sandwis Pluvia, many organizations that had been acting in secret abandoned all their activities, cutting ties, and eliminating all loose ends lest their dirty dealings be exposed. This cloning clinic was one such place, which is why the wolf had to come here personally. A few years ago, it had given countless companies samples of a 99% pure Fenrir bloodline, asking them to try and cultivate a pure 100% bloodline if they could, while he tried to do the same. Before they could make any substantial progress, many such facilities had been attacked, and now even more had been closed. The wolf was naturally here to retrieve whatever samples the facility had, as well as to look through their research data. Yet when it arrived, it suddenly smelt a certain scent that stunned it. Its own bloodline, which had ceased growing for so long, suddenly trembled with excitement. There was something within the facility that could help it. The wolf, at first, thought that the facility had achieved the full 100% blood purity in one of the clones, but when it followed the scent, it discovered that the thing that was exciting its bloodline was not a pure-blooded Fenrir clone. No, it was the clone of a human woman. The wolf was stunned, by the agitation from its bloodline was too great. The wolf was completely unable to stop itself, and broke the clone out of its container and devoured it. The clone naturally lacked a soul, and had been merely in the mortal realm, yet suddenly the wolf felt a certain hint of warmth. There was hope. Greed flashed in the wolf's eyes as searched through the entire facility, devouring each of such clones, yet none of them were actually enough. The disparity was too great. But it presented a hope, and so the wolf began to search through the facility's logs and files. Unfortunately, when whoever ran the facility killed all the facility workers through whatever means they had used, they also erased all the data files that the facility had. But now that the wolf had had a taste, how could it give up? Since it found these clones in one cloning facility, it would continue to look through more. Chances were high that it would encounter those clones again. It would be best if the wolf could get a lead on the original. Either way, now that the wolf had devoured the clone, it would find it much easier to pick up its trace across the realm. The wolf quickly took all the Fenrir clones, and then teleported away, destroying the facility thoroughly before he left. Finding even one of these facilities had been hard to begin with, due to how well they hid, but the wolf would not give up so easily. Not when it finally saw hope for advancement. Chapter 1385 Something Amiss. Lex was naturally unaware of what happened within the origin realm. Even though he had searched for Moon's clone relying on his own bloodline, finding even one such facility was incredibly difficult and time-consuming. Although Lex had not completely located all of them, he had to hand over this task to others while he handled more urgent matters. While they could not rely on bloodline to find these facilities, they could rely on traditional means of tracking and searching. It was not that he did not care, but that he could not afford to spend too much time on this. If he did not handle the many matters that bothered him, who knew when he would also get swept away by a formidable foe? The Midnight Inn, for all its bluster, was, at any given time, just one big accident away from being destroyed. But though there was danger, Lex was also making tremendous progress. With a soft smile, Lex observed the small birdhouse in front of him. The color was an odd blend of dark brown and maroon, shifting its shade in the light. The tiny birdhouse, small enough to fit in Lex's palm, would look quite pleasant in front of the soft brown bark of the void stabilization sequoia tree, which was fortunate for this small birdhouse would be Lex's treehouse. Naturally, once activated, the size of the treehouse would expand. In fact, besides its defensive capabilities, the thing Lex most paid attention to was its ability to grow and expand as required, as well as create any layout he wished, as long as it did not exceed the total greatest covered area that the birdhouse could occupy. At the moment, the birdhouse could, at most, expand to 200,000 square feet of covered area. That was both quite a lot, and very little depending on one's point of view. The average house back in the US was about 2,600 square feet, and in the UK it was 1,000 square feet. By that standard, it was pretty big. But compared to the Midnight Inn, which hosted hundreds of millions of guests, it was barely anything. But it was enough for a tavern. This was one more problem he would look into. Lex had already determined to sport a stubble, or maybe a light beard. He was getting sidetracked. Lex returned to the tree, and paused. Something was different, though he couldn't tell what specifically. Of course, he knew that the tree had been struck with a lightning tribulation. He was not surprised. The turtle had informed him that having the tree mutate and mature early would trigger a tribulation, but the tree should be more than strong enough to withstand it. Indeed, the tree had withstood the tribulation without issue, and its body seemed greatly nourished. The trunk was just as robust as ever, while each and every branch was firm yet flexible if need be. The leaves were green, and the whole tree was emanating an aura of liveliness. All was as expected. Yet Lex could not help but suspect something was amiss. He immediately summoned his spirit and soul sense, inspecting the tree for any changes, but all seemed to be normal. Whatever changes there were, he had already expected. So why did he feel like all was not as it seemed? Lex had immense confidence in his instincts, so if they felt something was amiss, it definitely was. He was not one of those types to start doubting himself. The issue was, even if he was aware that something was wrong, he could not tell what it was. Fearing that something might go wrong, Lex decided to skip the part where he took his time in admiring the treehouse. He attached the small birdhouse he created to the tree, and channeled his spirit energy inside of it, causing it to suddenly grow large. In a matter of seconds, a large, sprawling treehouse appeared within the branches of the tree, and Lex submitted this tree to the system to inspect. Hopefully, if it passed, he could begin his second tavern. Chapter 1386 Arrakis. Lex watched and waited, no longer taking his time to admire the treehouse, but rather waiting for the system's evaluation. From afar, the treehouse was not exactly visible, covered by the leaves. But once someone came close enough to view it from underneath, the actual treehouse would become visible. Quest complete. As the inn grows, and its reputation spreads, so too must your capabilities as the innkeeper. Build a new tavern with your own hands, without any help, fitting to be used as a subsidiary of the Midnight Inn. Quest reward, increase in number of taverns by 1. Remarks, look at you, not mooching off of others. How fast kids grow. New quest, integrate a tavern into the history of a world. Quest reward, subject to performance. Remarks, do not go down in history for an epic case of food poisoning, or burn the beards of all the residents on a new world. Lex coughed and resisted the urge to facepalm. Instead, he just focused on the fact that the treehouse had just been accepted. Moreover, he was not bummed about the fact that there did not seem to be any additional reward for all the effort he put into making the treehouse. He knew that even if the system didn't specifically state it, the system rewarded additional effort and achievements. While it did not specifically state that the new quest was as a result of the treehouse being awesome, the fact that the next quest had an open-ended reward was definitely a result of his previous efforts. Fortunately, he was already working on having the tavern be a big part of a world's history, just because he liked controlling the flow of a story. Now, he just needed to get some staff for the second tavern, send it to a new world, and kick things off. With that done, he could focus on the Midnight Games, the audit report, shutting off the teleportation in the Origin realm and planet environment. Desert planet Lex had arrived with a 400 feet tall treehouse tavern onto a desert planet that had no trees whatsoever. Well, at least the treehouse would be easy to find at least. He just needed to position it in a place where it would easily encounter flow of traffic. Originally, he thought it would be nice for the tavern to be in a town, or even a city, but a giant tree appearing suddenly might be a little startling. Lex pulled up a holographic map of the world, and studied it for a while. The map displayed all large cities, towns, trade routes, migration patterns, treasures and anything else that might be relevant to him. After a while, Lex decided on a spot, and teleported over. Well, how bad could things be? He was sure that he'd find something interesting to do on this planet, he was sure, because having a system would more or less ensure it. During his free time, Lex decided to start working on the schematics for the system he would make himself. The first thing he had to decide was what kind of system he wanted. The planet Arrakis was a desert all around, but that did not mean it was entirely covered in sand, where everything was hot. The tree reappeared in a barren desert, where the ground was hard and cracked for countless miles, with the most distinguishable feature nearby being a large mountain range made entirely of rock. As it happened, on the other side of the mountain range was a cold desert, and the tips of all the mountains were covered in glaciers. As such, throughout the year, a number of streams flowed down the mountains, forming a lake near which the planet's largest city was built. One day when the tree suddenly appeared within view of the city, all the residents within were confused and afraid. The city entered lockdown, but not before a single person escaped the city, wounded and bleeding. But seeing as how the gates sealed right behind him, he managed to gain some time while running from whoever was chasing him. But all was not well. He would need to reach the city before sundown, or bad things would happen. Yes, among the entire populace, Tatsuya Saigen was the only one who knew what a tree was, and so didn't fear it. Even if he didn't understand what it was doing here, he was not one to judge. After all, he himself was from X-142, the very same planet that Lex used to visit the Emporium. Chapter 1387 Paradise Eye. The Midnight Treehouse, as Lex decided to call it so that it was easily distinguishable from the Midnight Tavern, was pretty big, so naturally the house part of the treehouse was big as well. Despite there being a reception room right at the foot of the tree, from where new guests could enter, the rest of the treehouse was higher up. This design was purposefully selected by Lex, since he was on a one-star planet. The locals here wouldn't be strong, and it might be inconvenient for most to reach the treehouse itself if the entrance weren't on the floor. From the entrance there was a staircase that went around the trunk of the tree until it eventually reached the upper levels, but in case guests were not in the mood to climb hundreds of stairs, there was also a teleportation formation. The actual layout of the treehouse would be ever-changing, for that was the whole point of the treasure Lex crafted. Based on the surroundings, the weather, the solar and lunar cycles, and anything else that could affect the scenery, the layout would keep changing to present the best possible layout to give the guests the best possible view at all times. Oh, there was also a bunch of feng shui stuff going on with the layout, which apparently meant that the spirit energy within the treehouse would always be very high and pure. It would naturally cleanse the surrounding air of any pollution, not to mention that the area surrounding the tree would slowly become richer in spirit energy the longer the tree stayed in one place. As the layout of the treehouse changed, Lex paid special attention to the treehouse, watching it for any abnormalities, but picked up nothing. It would suck for the first guest to appear at the treehouse, only for the tree to pull out a root and whip them to death. Though the tree technically didn't have a cultivation realm, it would take a nascent soul cultivator to even begin making a mark on the tree. Until Lex was gone, the tree would have to satisfy itself with only sensing the universe around it. That wasn't too bad. As a newborn, the tree did not actually know much about the universe, so studying all the living beings occupying the house attached to its body would present a good learning experience. For now, that included Lex, who the tree absolutely did not observe at all. From the information it inherited in its memories, it knew that certain beings, once too powerful, would be able to tell if anyone observed or even thought about them. The others, however, were all right. But there weren't too many others, for now. Fortunately, as the tree's roots dug deeper into the ground, something it naturally did, it discovered that there was an abundance of life on the seemingly desolate planet. It was just that most of it seemed to be under the surface of the planet, away from the harsh climate. As its roots dug even deeper, it touched upon the natural ley lines of the planet, discovering a secret, underground channel of energy cycling around the world. There were also underground rivers, filled with pure, clean water. Not only that, the water itself also contained very rich aqua energy, though for anyone below the immortal realm, it would just be very rich spiritual energy. But while most things the tree discovered underground were pure and teeming with vitality, it also discovered something dark, hidden deep below the surface. Tendrils of this darkness crept up, reaching towards all the pure things. It reached the insects, and began to corrode them, turning them into rabid, mindless mutants. It reached towards the waters, and tried to poison it, though so far the water was resisting. The darkness tried to pollute the very ground itself, and it was beginning to have an effect. Of course, the ground around the tree started to get cleaned, but it was clear that something sinister lay hidden in the depths of this world, too far down even for the tree's roots to reach. The darkness intrigued the tree, but since it couldn't specifically act out and search for it, the tree put it out of its mind. Instead, it focused more on its immediate surroundings. The shade provided by the tree's canopy caused a few insects to emerge from the ground, and they all studied the foreign entity, unsure what to make of it. Chapter 1388 Paradise 2. The scorching heat or Arrakis turned the very ground into a proverbial stovetop, burning or cooking anything that touches it. At least where the sands covered the ground, the insects could bury themselves within the dunes, but in the tough, impenetrable grounds of the barren desert, these insects could only hide within the cracks in the ground, emerging only at night. Considering that the daylight cycle on this planet was 100 hours long, that was a long time to stay hidden within a few cracks. But the soil around the treehouse was no longer scorching, even if the shade had only existed for a few minutes. The burning, insufferable winds suddenly became cool and pleasant as soon as they entered beneath the tree, as if a formation existed around the tree, preventing the boiling heat from entering. In fact, it was not just the heat that was being kept out. The tough soil began to soften and turn fertile. Though nothing had grown here for a long time, over the centuries countless creatures had died and turned to dust atop these lands, fertilizing them. Now that the conditions finally allowed for it, the ground was ready to support life once more. Lex, sitting at the top of the tree, also noticed the subtle change, and had an idea. From within his spatial ring, he summoned a few patches of grass he had plucked from the Midnight Realm. The grass from that realm was a treasure, and could literally save a dying man's life, or turn a mortal into a cultivator. He recalled back on Earth there was a cultivator who turned from a mortal into a nascent soul cultivator. His grass did something similar, but not exactly. The reason it did not bring a cultivator all the way to the nascent realm was because it maintained, if not enhanced, the potential of the eater to cultivate further. Of course, the grass could not propagate in this one-star world, but Lex did not intend for that either. Instead, as he planned those few tufts of grass, right at the base of the tree, touching the trunk, he expected a lesser variant of it to grow and cover the now soft soil beneath the tree. Since the tree was already foreign to this world, there was no reason to hold back. He would turn the area under the tree into a paradise. One of the first rules of running a business such as that of a tavern or an inn was to stay neutral, and not get involved with local politics. Of course, should they try to make contact with him first, he would gladly respond. The group in white whispered amongst themselves as they watched Lex tend the garden. At first, they were definitely creeped out by everything constantly dying, but as that slowly stopped, and grass began to grow. Fruit trees finally started to grow, and so did the flowers. Despite the foreignness of everything, the group of observers could not help but find the scene beautiful. Even though they did not know what they were looking at, they felt an attraction to it that they could not explain. One of the group stepped forward and removed their face mask, and arrived at the very edge of the grass, taking in a deep smell. Lex raised an eyebrow, surprised. He never would have imagined that a desert planet, lacking vegetation at all, would have had elves. No wonder they were so attracted to the trees and the grass. What is this? The elf murmured as he reached forward with trembling hands, finally touching the freshly grown grass. It was slightly moist, and soft to the touch. It was even covered by a thin layer of spiritual energy, and though the elf did not absorb that energy, he felt completely reinvigorated just feeling it. Though natives of Arrakis never let the water in their body go to waste, the elf could not help but shed a tear. Chapter 1389 The Chosen One. The elf, ancient as mountains, old as the sky, raised his slightly moist hand, and then used it to wipe the tear off his face. In that sensation from touching the grass, the elf, Fremen, felt something extremely core to his entire existence, something he had been deprived of for a very long time. Overcome by a sudden bout of mania, the elf did something that his partners, and basically anyone of Arrakis, would consider insane. He took off his boot, and without waiting, stepped forward into the lush, green grass. The ground on Arrakis was more than just hot, though it could cook an egg in under a minute. The constant exposure to the star of the star system, which was abnormally active, caused an overabundance of yang energy to be immersed in anything the starlight touched for too long. Now, regardless of temperature, anything containing yang energy could sear off the skin of anyone below the immortal realm, unless they specifically had a cultivation technique attuned to it, or against it. Of course, the natives of the planet did not know that. All they knew was that the ground was radioactive during the daytime. At night, the natural cycle that the environment had formed caused the yang nature of the ground to be suppressed, allowing others to come into contact with the ground. Fortunately, simply wearing protective equipment made from locally harvested materials was enough to resist the searing effect of the ground. That was why the other elves reacted so strongly to Fremen taking off his boot and stepping towards the grass without protection. The burns from yang exposure were not so simple. But Fremen ignored it. Instinct had taken hold of him, and he could not resist stepping onto the grass. Something deep inside of him craved it. The soft crunch of grass as he stepped on it was weirdly audible, and Fremen was forced to close his eyes lest he let more tears fall. His body was reacting to the touch of nature, something it had been mostly deprived of its entire life. Fremen turned back, and saw that the others he came with were still watching hesitantly from a distance. Even though they were just as much entranced by the beautiful garden underneath the treehouse, they managed to resist its allure. Such caution was to be expected in the face of something so unexpected. "Come on guys, you must feel what this is like," Fremen said, inviting the others. "It's as if we have been living an incomplete life so far, cut off from our true purpose." But, for completely incomprehensible reasons, the other elves were not reassured by the claims Fremen made in a near-obsessive voice. Strange. Instead, they grew even warier, and drew their weapons as they looked towards Lex as if he were some kind of demon. "No need to be cautious, allow me to introduce myself," Lex said, though he doubted they'd be convinced so easily. "My name is Lex, and I am running this humble little tavern. This is a place that welcomes guests, which is why, well, we don't particularly harm our guests." "Oh yeah, totally," responded one of the elves sarcastically. "You don't want to hurt us, which is why you've totally bewitched Fremen, and are attracting us into your domain." Lex laughed, for he could totally see how it seemed like he was some evil entity, trying to capture them all. "I assure you, this is nothing but a tavern. It may seem a little unusual to you all, but I assure you that it is perfectly safe." "Oh yes, it makes sense. I often visit taverns that are in the middle of nowhere, far away from any town or city." "Hey man, you try getting the trade license and zoning permits for a giant tree inside a city. It's not as easy as it seems." Chapter 1390 The Chosen One 2. Although Lex had not meant that as a serious response, it gave the others pause. It seemed like bureaucracy was a problem regardless of country, planet, or race. Jokes aside, the Treehouse Tavern is not like any other, Lex said, deciding to skip his amazing jokes. It wouldn't be funny if those who he was speaking to couldn't understand them to begin with. The Treehouse Tavern is associated with the Midnight Inn, and as such travels from planet to planet, every so often. Even I cannot predict when the treehouse will go to another planet, so don't miss out, and enjoy it while it lasts. You're from another planet? Firmament asked, for some reason surprised by that fact more than any other. The Empire will not like that. They like to strictly control access to and from the planet. Perhaps you should hide the tree, and not display it so blatantly. Such a treasure should be protected, not exposed to the dangers of the Arrakis. Lex smiled amusedly. I assure you, the Treehouse Tavern is more than safe. I do not think we will be having any problems with any empire. Anyway, if you guys wish to come up, you can come through the reception. You can stay in the garden down below if you want, but only as long as it doesn't bother any guests. Technically, Lex had no guests right now, but he would eventually. While the garden was a great way to attract attention and passerbyers, he wanted to establish from the beginning that he wouldn't tolerate them causing a ruckus. With that said, he retreated to the other side of the garden, tending to the still-growing plants. He did not want to unnerve the new possible guests, as he could see his presence greatly unnerved them, for they were too cautious. Come Fremen, we must leave immediately, and send word of this development to the shaman, one of the elves called, still unwilling to step into the garden. He was being hunted, he was always being hunted. He didn't know what it was about his luck that caused him to make enemies wherever he went, but this time, he was truly at the end of his rope. Running towards the tree was actually a really bad idea, as everyone would come to investigate it sooner or later. It was the opposite of where he wanted to be. But he was hoping that near the tree he could discover some treasured fruit that would help him recover to his peak condition. He didn't even care for any improvements or upgrades. Just removing his fatigue would be enough. After all, he had a big fight in front of him soon enough. 15 minutes later, a severely burned Tetsuya finally reached the garden. As soon as he smelled the fresh grass, the flowers, and the trees, Tetsuya nearly broke down. Originating from a farming planet, being transported to a desert planet was especially torturous on him. He never thought he'd be able to enjoy these simple pleasures ever again so long as he did not leave Arrakis, and he would never be able to leave this place as long as the Empire ruled it. That momentary weakness quickly passed though. He could not allow himself to relax. Instead, he raised his guard as high as he possibly could, and then carefully began to wade through the garden. While appearances may make it seem like this place was a paradise, especially on a planet such as Arrakis, he knew better. For this massive tree to suddenly just appear out of nowhere, it must be hiding an immense secret, greater than any he had ever seen. He used a number of techniques to scout the area for any dangers, and at being unable to detect any obvious threats, he cautiously collected all the dew gathered on the grass, and drank it in one big gulp. Although the amount of water he drank was barely anything, he suddenly felt a rush of energy pour through his body, healing his deepest wounds and helping him recover. Yet instead of feeling glad, Tetsuya was horrified. What kind of place was this if even the moisture on the grass was high enough level to heal him? Cautiously, and with great doubt as if he was double-minded about this, Tetsuya broke off a single blade of grass, and bit it.